Nangi confronted her mother, who told her how stupid she was for leaving her marriage. She told Nangi that she was so deeply in love with Ibiye and not willing to leave him for anyone, not even her daughter Nangi. Once upon a time, there lived a young girl named Nangi who lived in a small village with her poor father. Nangi was a very hardworking girl, always eager to help her father in his little farm. Her mother abandoned her with her father the day after she was born, and no one heard from her ever again. Nangi's father did everything possible to look after his daughter. He even gave up his job at the factory just to look after his daughter, who was his bundle of joy. Nangi grew up so close to her father, who she shared all her joys and fears with. He was the only family she had, and he loved her so much. However, tragedy struck one evening when he collapsed at his farm and died instantly. Nangi was so devastated to hear of her father's death. She would spend hours by his graveside, weeping and asking why he had to leave without any form of warning. Their hut felt so lonely without him, and Nangi dreaded to be alone in the hut, considering the fact that everything in the hut reminded her of him. One day, Nangi sat by her father's grave weeping when a young man approached her and offered his heartfelt condolences. He saw how sad Nangi looked, and this brought back memories of when he lost his own father a few years ago. The young man, whose name was Ibiye, lost his father a few years ago and made it a tradition to always visit his father's graveside on his birthday, as this brought him some form of comfort. Ibiye, having known the sadness that accompanied the loss of a loved one, became a source of joy to Nangi. He would visit her hut and spend hours, cracking jokes and telling ancient stories, and with him Nangi found laughter again. And as the months went by, Nangi and Ibiye became inseparable and soon fell deeply in love with each other. Their shared grief brought them together as they drew strength from their collective memories and forged a future filled with hope. They got married in a ceremony attended by the entire village as the people rejoiced with them. However, after several years of being married, Nangi struggled to have a child. The cry of a baby, which she so desperately yearned, was absent in her home, and this troubled her as she moved from one herbalist to the other seeking for a solution. Several herbs and concoctions were recommended to her, and Nangi's stomach became a dumping ground for all sorts of mixtures and potions. Yet, the child she longed for did not come. Her husband Ibiye was so supportive and assured her of his love for her, but Nangi felt pressured as the whispers of the villagers grew louder with each passing day. One night, Nangi had a dream where a young woman who looked exactly like her snatched a baby boy from her arms and began to run. Nangi tried to run after the woman, but her legs were fixated on the ground, unable to move. Nangi woke up from the dream terrified as she wondered what her dream meant. She decided to head to the market the next morning to buy some food items, and by the time she returned, she met a strange woman sitting outside her hut. Nangi, curious to know who the woman was, hastened her steps, and to her greatest surprise, the woman hugged her tightly and began to weep. Confused as to what was happening, Nangi wiggled her way out of the woman's embrace as she asked who she was, and the woman revealed to Nangi that she was her mother. Nangi had never imagined that a day like this would ever come. Her mother, who abandoned her a day after she was born, had miraculously returned, and Nangi did not know what to feel at that moment. A part of her was happy to finally see her mother, whilst the other part was filled with rage, a rage that had been subdued all these years, as she wondered what wrong she could have done to be abandoned by her own mother a day after she was born. Why? That was all Nangi could mutter at that moment, and her mother held her hands and apologized for all the pain that she put her through. She told Nangi that she was so young and naive and was deceived into leaving the village by a man who she believed was in love with her. She knew how much Nangi's father loved her, but she was never in love with him. So, once Nangi was born, she eloped from the village with a man that she truly loved. She told Nangi that all she did then was for love and that she was truly sorry for abandoning her. She told Nangi to find a place in her heart to forgive her, as she had returned to make peace with her daughter. Nangi, having longed for the love of a mother all her life, forgave her mother as they both hugged to seal their reconciliation. Nangi offered her mother to come live with her, considering what she was going through with conceiving a child. She believed her mother would be a source of comfort to her at this critical time and poured her heart to her whenever she was feeling overwhelmed. One day, Nangi went to the market with her mother and met a woman who told her of a powerful juju man in the neighboring village who had the power to give her children. Excited about the news, Nangi told her husband, who kicked against the idea of she visiting the said juju man. He told Nangi that he had heard so many terrible things about the juju man and that he does not want any member of his family to have anything to do with him. Nangi, feeling so sad, approached her mother to cry. The pressure of not having a child was weighing her down so badly, and her mother advised her to go against her husband's warning to visit the juju man. She said that if Nangi ended up not having a child for her husband would go outside to marry another woman. So Nangi should do everything possible to secure her home, even if it meant going against her husband to visit the juju man who had the power to give her a child. Nangi listened to her mother's advice and decided to visit the juju man one hot afternoon. When she arrived at the juju man's hut, the juju man told her that her husband was behind her inability to have a child. He told Nangi that her husband was an evil man and that if she ever wanted to have a child, she would have to leave the marriage. Nangi, devastated at the news, returned home and confronted her husband, who denied having a hand in her childlessness. Ibiye was so distraught by the accusation and vehemently denied any involvement in such dark practices. He pleaded with Nangi to trust him because he loved her too deeply to hurt her. But Nangi's mind was already poisoned by the seed of doubt planted by the juju man's words. The atmosphere in their home became so tense, filled with distrust and heartache. Feeling isolated and desperate for a solution, Nangi made the painful decision to leave Ibiye. She moved in with her mother, who welcomed her with open arms. However, what Nangi did not know was that her mother was the mastermind behind all the confusion that had been happening in her home. She planned with the woman in the market as well as the juju man to convince Nangi to leave her husband's house so as to give her the opportunity to take over her home. Over the next few months, Nangi's mother grew increasingly close to Ibiye, feigning sympathy and concern over their broken marriage to draw him closer so as to charm him into falling in love with her. Ibiye, feeling abandoned and betrayed by Nangi, found solace in her mother's arms, unaware of the deceit at play. As time passed, Nangi's mother and Ibiye developed a relationship that eventually led to their marriage. Nangi, still struggling with her emotions and the failure to conceive, was oblivious of her mother's marriage with her husband until it was too late. When Nangi learned of her mother's marriage to her husband Ibiye, She was so overwhelmed by a sense of betrayal and confusion. Her heart ached at the betrayal, not only by her husband, but more painfully by her own mother, who she never knew was this evil. The realization dawned on her that the recent events were not coincidental. Her mother had orchestrated the breakup of her marriage to achieve her own selfish desires. Feeling utterly deceived, Nangi confronted her mother, who told her how stupid she was for leaving her marriage. She told Nangi that she was so deeply in love with Ibiye and not willing to leave him for anyone, not even her daughter Nangi. Nangi in that moment regretted ever accepting her mother back in her life. She confronted her husband Ibiye, who could not look her in the eyes. The man she had known was gone, and this broke her heart, as she could not believe how she let her own mother take over her beautiful marriage. Nangi, unable to withstand the betrayal, moved to the neighboring village, where she focused on healing and rebuilding her life away from the past that had betrayed her so deeply. Nangi began to find happiness within herself as she realized that her happiness was not tied to having a child or a husband, but was found within herself and her ability to overcome adversity. Meanwhile, tragedy struck one morning when Nengi's mother, carrying her husband's child, fell gravely ill during childbirth. Her labor was so painful and her breath began to grow thin. After several hours of painful labor, she brought forth a son into the world, but as swiftly as the cry of the newborn baby pierced through the air, Nengi's mother's life slipped away as her body surrendered to the cold hands of death. In that stark moment, the spell she had secretly placed upon her daughter's husband cleared from his eyes, and Ibiye regained his senses and immediately set out to look for his wife Nangi. The cloud of enchantment that had fogged his judgment vanished, revealing the harsh reality that he married his own wife's mother, who birthed a son for him. Filled with remorse, Ibiye set out to find his wife Nangi, who was living a quiet life in the neighboring village. When he set his eyes on her, he pleaded for her forgiveness. He told her of how her mother used a charm to hold him down and how he was unaware of all that happened the past months. Nangi, although deeply hurt, knew that holding on to anger would only keep her bound to a past which had already stolen too much from her life, so she chose to forgive him, to free herself from all the bitterness and pain in her heart. Ibiye pleaded with her to return with him to their village as her mother had died whilst giving birth to their son, and Nangi agreed to return, not as his wife, but as a guardian to her stepbrother, a child who was innocent of the deception that brought him into the world. Together, they returned to the village, where Nangi took on the role of a mother to the child born of her mother's evil deeds. The villagers were all shocked, as they never expected Nangi to accept her mother's child, but Nangi, through her actions, taught them that forgiveness was more for oneself than for another. Nangi's decision to embrace her stepbrother was proof of her extraordinary character. In him, she saw not the result of her mother's betrayal, but a new beginning, a chance to sow seeds of love in place of the hurt that had been done to her. Ibiye, still remorseful for his actions, worked tirelessly to make up for his misdeeds. He supported Nengi's every endeavor, grateful for her forgiveness and the chance to do right by their son. After several months, Ibiye and Nangi gradually mended their broken marriage, and Nangi got pregnant and gave birth to a son who she cherished with all of her heart. She also took care of her mother's son, who she took as her own, and they all lived happily ever after. The lesson to be learned from this story is that the wicked will never go unpunished. We should never betray the trust others have in us or take that which belongs to another. Oftentimes, when we are faced with grave betrayals, Forgiving the perpetrator could seem so difficult, especially when such betrayals come from those that we love. However, in the actual sense, holding on to the anger only keeps us bound to the past. So, even if it might seem difficult, we should learn to forgive so as not to remain bound to our past. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.